Happy Valentine's Day. Come on. Awesome. I was wearing a pink polo today, and I was preparing. I was ready to rock. And my wife said, "You look lame," so she picked out my shirt. This is what she chose. So it's not purple, it's mauve. So I was really leaning in. So hopefully you guys can tell that I tried. We are continuing our series, DTR, Define the Relationship. We talked about marriage, we talked about singleness, and then tonight on Valentine's Day, we're talking about dating. So I want to start with a little story from way back in the day. My wife and I got married August 2nd, 2014. Rebecca and Fredy married. And then we went to Mexico to honeymoon with all my cousins. It wasn't my cousins. That's a low-hanging fruit, though. We went to Playa del Carmen, and all the homies were like, "Dude, you got a white girl. Tell us how you did it." And I was like, "Wait, what? That's crazy." Because I grew up in the States. I didn't know that the homies wanted the white chicks, I guess. So it made for great conversation, lots of fun jokes. The honeymoon was great, like you getting used to life together. But eventually honeymoon ends, you come home. And we got married at 22 years old. So it did not take long for the immaturities in our life to show themselves. And probably within 6 months of getting married, we started going to couples counseling. There was a lot of things we had not yet discussed, even before getting into marriage. Part of the reason I'm so passionate about helping you be prepared for dating is because I myself did not do a great job. God in his grace showed me mercy and it worked out, but I could not have. And one of the things I remember, one of these core memories, if you will, was as we're going to couples counseling, we're like, "What are we gonna talk about? I thought everything's fine." She's like, "Are you sure everything's fine?" And I'm like, "I think everything's fine." She's like, "You saying everything's fine is why we're going." And then we go and we talk, and then on the way home, she looks at me and she's like, she's like, "It feels like we never know how to speak to each other until we're in the room with the counselor, and then suddenly we both learn to talk. And then we leave, and then we go back to what we were before, where we just talk past each other. Why is communication so hard?" And I kind of made fun of her in the moment. I was like, "Because I don't know, it is." But looking back, I'm like, it was a profound statement. It is a universal experience. That's not a Rebecca problem. That's an everyone problem. That's a Fredy problem. Every single person has to learn to communicate. And communicating back and forth is what makes a healthy relationship. Healthy relationships take a tremendous amount of work. We started this series by talking about marriage because a dating relationship is supposed to head towards a marriage relationship. And if communication is hard, and that's just all relationships, and dating is a specific kind of relationship leading to marriage, then it's just the same thing with more complexity and much greater commitment. If the goal of dating is marriage, then the process of dating is supposed to be learning the things that prepare you for marriage. One of those, maybe the most important of those, is communication skills. So the big idea for tonight is everything good takes effort to gain. So everything good takes effort to gain. We're gonna talk about working diligently and then walking away quietly. So first one, work diligently. This is all coming out of Proverbs 12:11, so one very short verse. "Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense." So if you've been around for a few years, you know that I often preach on dating out of the book of Proverbs because the book of Proverbs is wisdom. It's the way the world works as God has ordered it. So God makes the world ordered and we can observe it. And as we observe it, Proverbs is that. It's us looking at the way that God has made the world and saying, this is how the world works. Let's act wisely in this situation. So when we read Proverbs, not only do we learn things, we learn principles that we can then apply to the rest of life. So this one is a principle about work ethic, but it can extend to more than just work. And I'm going to apply it specifically to dating, and then within dating, to communication. If I was gonna summarize the principle, I would say something along the lines of obtain that grain, or get that bread, right? That's the principle, right? Work your land and you will have plenty of bread, right? There is a statement being made about work ethic, namely that work ethic is rewarded. If you put in effort, you will reap a reward. That's what this proverb is saying. So the hardest work you can put into a relationship is good communication. It is a universal skill. It is something that all of us do all the time, and it is a skill that must be learned. If you've ever taken a communications class, one of the things they'll teach you right away is that 2/3 of your communication is nonverbal. So even if you are the most introverted, least verbal person on the planet, you are still communicating all the time. Everything about us communicates. Our facial expressions, our posture, the way you stand, the way you sit, the way you are in a group, right? So if you walk up to a group and Freddie's in that group, and as you walk up, I do this, do you think Freddie wants to talk to you? I didn't say I didn't want to talk to you, but I turned my back, right? Our communication is on all the time. Our communication skills are something that we must learn all the time. So I want to give you 3 simple steps towards good communication. 3 simple steps. We need the right word with the right tone at the right time. That's it, 3 simple steps. This is the foundation of good communication. We can add a lot more to it, but at the bare minimum, if we get these 3 things, you're gonna figure out what communication is. The first one, the right word. So it seems like simple enough, but it is remarkable how often we choose the wrong word. Choosing the right word requires wisdom, requires prayer. It requires a certain level of maturity. I'm just gonna be honest with you. But when we are talking to people, the words we choose actually matter. So if you were gonna comment on my shirt and you said, Fredy, that shirt's not so flattering, I would be like, what's up? Let's go. You don't think my shirt's flattering? That's such a rude thing to say. If you said, that shirt's not my vibe, I'm like, okay, it's not your vibe, right? The difference between those, right? The words you chose, the vibe, but it's your vibe. You're saying, I myself would not wear that shirt. That shirt's not flattering is making a general statement about my appearance. I'm gonna react to that. I'm gonna be mad. I'll frown at you, then I'll turn my back on you, right? The words we choose profoundly matter. That's a negative example. Let me give you a positive example. If I am frustrated, or actually, I would never be frustrated at this because I'm late all the time. If the homie Adriana is frustrated because I showed up late to our last 4 meetings, which may or may not have happened, and she hits me with not, Fredy, you're an idiot, because then I'm gonna go, what's up, right? If she hits me with, Fredy, I feel undervalued when you don't show up on time, I'm like, oh snap, that's the right word. She is sharing her experience of feeling undervalued, underappreciated, underconnected with, and she's sharing her experience. That is the right word. When we choose words, there are words we choose that have pricklies on them, right? That people hear them and they react, right? Use statements people react to. There are words that people don't react to. We need to think before we speak and say, the word I'm choosing, the word I'm describing this person with, the word that I'm giving this person, is it a word with pricklies on it? Is this something that people are gonna react to? We need the right word. We also need the right tone, right? It's not just saying the right word, but it's saying it the right way, right? Like there is something about the way that we say things that can make even the right word seem not like the right word. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes when I get really frustrated, I asked my wife to do something, or I told the boys to do something. I got 3 little kids, and my 2 oldest are boys, a 4-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. They're super energetic little dudes. They don't listen very good. And I tell them to do something, and they don't listen. And I'm like, oh, you guys just make daddy so happy when you listen to me. I'm like, do you think daddy's actually happy? No. I said, happy? I love you boys so much. You would be like, yeah, you said you love them, but like your facial expression, your tone, like you're not passing the vibe check, right? Like you are coming across like kind of mad, right? And then I would deny it, which only proves that I'm in fact mad, right? There is a way of speaking where we say the right words, but we say it in the wrong way, right? When we're speaking to someone, it's not just choosing the right word, it's then choosing the right tone, right? And part of this is slowing down enough to say, okay, I'm so frustrated in this situation. This person, Fredy, showed up late and I could blast him, but okay, I want to communicate the right word. Okay, there's something about my experience. I feel undervalued, okay? And I need to say it the right way, like, hey man, I really appreciate you making the time, but I do feel undervalued when you're not on time. The right word, the right tone, and lastly, the right time. I've shared some examples about a working relationship, but right timing is one of the biggest obstacles in communication, not just with people, but specifically in dating and then married relationships. I would say this is the place where I have most struggled in communicating effectively with my wife. We've been married over 10 years, and to this day, this is still something where like we are notorious for picking the wrong moments. You need a time, when I say right time, you need a time where you can have a one-on-one conversation that is not interrupted and that does not have witnesses that will interject into the moment. Walking up to someone when there's other people there, not the right time. Picking a moment when someone is in the middle of something, not the right time. Picking a moment when someone is very tired, not the right time. It is so easy to do this. A negative example from my own life is in that first year of marriage, like my wife and myself both struggled in getting used to the in-laws. And most of the time we wouldn't talk about it, but then like it seemed like as soon as it got past 10:30 p.m., it was like, oh, you had a good day? Let's talk about your mother, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? What about your crazy family? Are you serious? Turned into a crazy, we'll say discussion, but we were very respectful because we love each other. It was just a challenge for us to pick the right time. This is, I think, like for me, this has been the biggest struggle, right? I am a morning person. I wake up somewhere between like 5:30 and 6:30. It takes me like 30 seconds to feel awake, and then I'm ready for the day. My wife wakes up when her alarm goes off and she's hit snooze 3 times, and then she stumbles down the stairs with her eyes closed towards the coffee pot, right? And then she will wake up somewhere, she's awake, whatever, at 7:30, but then she's actually awake at like 10 a.m. And I'm like already awake, sitting at the bottom of the stairs like a puppy, wagging my tail, happy to see her. And I'm like, I know you just woke up, but I'd like to talk about our schedule for the weekend. And I'm like, wrong time. I know you just woke up, but I'm pretty annoyed at your parents. Here's what I think. I know you just woke up, but I'd like to talk about finances. I routinely picked the wrong time. And it was not just me who was doing this. She would be on the other side where Fredy falls asleep anytime after 7:30 p.m. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. I could be talking to you mid-conversation. I will fall asleep. I have fallen, like, you know that we are good friends if I have fallen asleep at your house. It's just something I do. If the couch is comfortable and I've had a Pepsi, I just lean back and sometimes I pass out. So we were at a friend's house, passed out. We get home, Rebecca's like, okay, I really wanted to talk to you. They were having this conversation. Like, I'd like to follow up. And I'm like, for sure, gone. And then in the morning, I'm like, what did you want to talk about? I'm locked in, I'm ready. And now she's not ready, right? So much of conversation is not just the right word. It's not just the right tone. It's also picking the right time. These are like the 3 minimum things so that you can have a meaningful engagement where you can work together to get on the same page. This is a skill. Communication is a skill that affects every single relationship. This is not just for dating. Obviously, I'm gonna apply it to dating, but communication is a skill that all of us use. And communication often breaks down. We don't use the right word. We don't use the right tone. We pick a very poor time. And communication breakdown is often what leads to conflict. Often, we will look at conflict and we'll say, this is a bad thing, right? My emotions are elevated. You kind of lean forward a little bit, or you turtle up, and you're like, I'm so uncomfortable. Why are we still talking about this? But conflict is an inevitable part of life, and conflict is actually an illuminating moment. In communication, communication sometimes breaks down, and when it breaks down, what a conflict is showing is, hey, there's something important here. We need to spend more time discussing this thing. So I'm gonna give you an example from my own life, and I'm gonna walk you through the bad version of that conflict, and then the good version of that conflict. So this is an example from Fredy's life. Rebecca and myself constantly talk about the balance between Fredy playing sports and Fredy not playing sports. So I'm for the boys, you already know. And one of the things I love to do is play touch football, basketball, and soccer, ideally all 3, sometimes slow pitch softball. And my wife is like, I'm just looking at the Google Calendar and I'm wondering where you're gonna fit all these things. And I'm like, if I don't sleep, I have more time for hoops and for football and for soccer. And we have an ongoing dialogue. What is the appropriate amount of time where Fredy can go and play the sports that he loves in a way that honors my family and maintains my commitments. So there's always a temptation in these conversations that Fredy starts to think, you know what? Rebecca is super lame and never wants me to have fun. I married a lame girl that doesn't like playing sports. What a bummer. And there's always a temptation from her side, where she's like, I married a dude who doesn't even like his family. Like, all he ever wants to do is play sports. Like, I know Saturdays are for the boys, but apparently every other day is too. Like, this guy's just trying to ditch. And it is so tempting for us to jump into these conversations, making some very negative assumptions in our head. And when we make these assumptions, it leads to bad conflict. So let me show you what it looks like. Bad conflict is us having a conversation about sports, and it jumps into the classic absolute language. You always, you never, right? Accusative words. Or I think, and you're like, okay, I'm saying about myself, I think you always, I think you are, right? I think you never. When we use absolute language like always or never, when we are directing all our words into personal attacks instead of asking questions, that inevitably raises the temperature and turns it into a conflict. I already started with a negative assumption. Rebecca doesn't want me to have fun. And then it's very easy to affirm that assumption based on accusative language and then take it one step further. Actually, it's not just that she doesn't want me to have fun. She's being like clingy, right? And from her end, it's not just that Fredy wants to ditch. It's actually, he's really selfish. He doesn't think of anyone but himself. It is so easy to go the next step, start kind of negative. You start making you statements, accusative statements, absolute statements, and then it's very easy to go fully negative. The opposite of that. A good conflict is where you start with questions. You start seeking to better understand the other person, and then your goal is, I need to understand you so that we can work together on a solution that works for both of us. The thing that we're trying to do is fix this communication breakdown, not each other. I'm trying to understand you so I know what you care about so that we can work together to find a solution that works for both people. So as Rebecca and I have conversations, the ones that are productive, the ones that make us both feel heard, that make us both feel loved, is when we start talking, why is it that I want what I want? And I'm like, well, you know, Rebecca, I appreciate you asking that. Like, I guess I like playing sports because it helps me decompress. Like, I have a busy life, I got a wife, I got kids, I got a job. And when I go and I kick a ball or I run someone over, it makes my heart happy. And she's like, that's a weird thing to say, like it's really aggressive. And I'm like, I'm a really aggressive dude. And this is the outlet I need so that I can be a loving husband and a loving dad. And she's like, when you put it that way, I see why you want to play. I don't know why you need 4 sports, but let's for sure do 1. And the same is true on her side. When I'm like, Rebecca, I don't understand why you won't let me play 6 different sports. Like, that seems crazy to me. Like, I thought you were on my team. And then she's like, well, no, I do. I want you to play all the sports, but like my love language is quality time. And when my husband keeps talking to me and tells me every single day that he's trying to play this weekend and next weekend and the weekend after that, it makes me think that you don't want to spend time with me. And the thing that makes me feel most loved is when you spend time with me. And I'm like, oh man, my wife wants to feel loved. My wife should feel loved. I'm her husband. I'm going to spend time with her. I need to spend time with her. Actually, I need to say no to these other people because they're just friends. This is my wife. This is my covenant partner. If you remember what I spoke about from Malachi 2, she's my companion. I mean, she's the most important person in my life. So good conflict seeks to ask questions, seeks to understand the other person, and then you collaborate to reach a solution. Okay, what's an appropriate amount of sports? Let's lock into 1. Let's balance sporting commitments with intentional time apart for a date night or for a quiet evening at home so that we both feel like our tanks are getting full. We're both getting the thing that we need, decompression, quality time. We both feel heard, we both feel loved. Good conflict is always possible, but it often doesn't happen. I think it often doesn't happen because we walk into these situations already having made bad assumptions. We already assume the worst in each other, so when we jump into the conversation, we're not starting at 0, we're actually starting in the negative. And all it takes is one accusative statement, one pokey word the other person uses, and all of a sudden, you're like, I'm ready to fight, or I'm ready to run, depending on your personality and your natural tendency in conflict. So if we're gonna be people who work diligently, because working diligently leads to a great harvest, we need to be people who make gracious assumptions. Not only do we need the right words and the right tone and the right time, that's the stuff we actually say, that's the stuff we do in the conflict. Before we get into the conflict, the battle begins in your mind when we need to make gracious assumptions about the other person. Gracious assumptions build up relationships. Ungracious assumptions tear them down. I wanna give you 2 ways that gracious assumptions help. When we make gracious assumptions about the other person, it helps us diffuse potential conflicts. So it makes a miscommunication just a miscommunication, and it actually doesn't turn into a conflict. So let me give you an example. You're buying a gift for someone, maybe someone special, maybe Valentine's Day, who knows? You're buying a special gift, and the expectations of the other person are not met by the gift that you bought. I'm gonna pick on the homie Adriana for an example, because she shared a hilarious one. So her husband, Sam, great guy, very practical dude. I madly relate to him. I understand how his mind works. Adriana was expecting some of that birthday jewelry. Ladies, you with her, right? Like, who doesn't want jewelry on their birthday? And if you get a husband, your husband should buy you jewelry on your birthday. Like, it makes sense. So she's expecting something kind of nice, maybe a little bougie. And what ends up happening is Sam pulls up and gives her a vacuum sealer. Like one of those things to save food. And Adriana's like, oh, this is so nice, right? The assumption she can make in that moment, this boy is an unromantic oaf. Are you kidding me? Embarrassing. Or she can go even one step further. She can say, this man literally forgot, pulls into the bay, buys the first thing he sees. Are you kidding me? She can make ungracious assumptions. She walks into the conversation, he says the wrong word, his tone's not perfect, the timing's not right, boom, conflict, bad conflict. Or she can take a little pause, she can make gracious assumptions, and she can say, you know what? I know my husband loves me. I know that he's a really practical dude. And actually, I was talking about wanting a food saver. So I understand why he would do it. I'm not happy with the time he chose to buy it, but it makes sense. I can see why his mind got there. And then jumps in and she's like, no, I really love the gift, but I was thinking it might have been better to get something a little bit more sparkly. And then it just turns into a conversation. And then Sam, of course, did the right thing, took it back, bought her something very sparkly. I actually don't know if he did after that. She sold it on Marketplace, there you go. It happens, it happens. The point I'm trying to make is when we make a gracious assumption, we diffuse a potential conflict. A miscommunication, an unmet expectation simply stays that, a miscommunication, an unmet expectation. We work together, we get on the same page, it becomes good conflict, you move on. The other way gracious assumptions help us is that when you are in the conflict, they help you recover faster. Sometimes a conflict cannot be avoided. Sometimes because of our emotions, because of the moment, wrong word gets used, wrong time is chosen, tone's not right. We're just in the muck now, we're in the mess. And what helps us in that mess is making a gracious assumption. So let me give you another example. Maybe you have a roommate, and you and your roommate have agreed, we have this chore list, this is your stuff, this is my stuff, we alternate every other week. Do your part, I'll do mine. And your roommate's not keeping up their end of the bargain, so you muster up the courage, and you address it, and you're like, hey, I just thought it would be really nice, maybe even helpful, if we could keep the list, because we had discussed it. And your roommate responds with, dude, why are you attacking me? And you're like, are you serious? I could not have been less direct. I was so meek and mild. Now I'm mad. No, you don't understand me. You're actually selfish. Boom. Okay, now it's a conflict. Even in the midst of a conflict, at any moment in that bad conflict, we can hit the brakes and we can make a gracious assumption. Instead of being in that conflict and thinking they use the wrong words, they're selfish, I already made bad assumptions, at any moment, we can say, you know what? It is possible that my communication wasn't clear. It is possible that they didn't understand me. It is possible that the instructions mean different things to them. Like my version of clean is different than their version of clean. My version of tidy is different than their version of tidy. Okay, listen. Maybe I overstepped. Can you help me understand what you think this list means? What do you consider timely? What do you consider clean? What do you consider tidy? Help me understand you. At any moment, we can make gracious assumptions. This other person isn't selfish. This other person maybe didn't understand me. This other person wants to keep living together. They want to make it work. That helps us pick the right words, pick the right tone, adjust even in not the right time. And it helps us accelerate the reconciliation process. Gracious assumptions diffuse conflict and accelerate reconciliation. I wanted to talk about communication broadly because I see this as like the biggest issue in young adult friendships, in young adult dating, and in young adult marriage. Like you people that I care about so much, when I meet with you one-on-one, when we go for coffee, when I see you in the hallway, like this is so often the root issue of whatever we actually end up talking about. It's misunderstandings, it's conflict related to communication breakdown. And what you need to know is whoever it is that you're mad at, whoever it is that has wronged you, it is always a helpful thing for us to make gracious assumptions because immaturity is not the same thing as immorality. So often in our relationships, we look at something someone did and we think, that person's dumb, that person's mean, that person is wicked, and we put them in the category of immoral, bad, broken. They're the worst. They're now a bad guy, and now in our minds, we automatically make negative assumptions about them because they are immoral, they're bad, they're broken. But if we're the kind of people who make gracious assumptions, then we would view other people's errors as immaturity. Immaturity is something you grow out of. Immaturity is something I had to grow out of. I got married at 22 years old. If you talk to my wife, she would tell you, Fredy was an idiot when we got married. And you're like, but you married him. She's like, oh yeah, he was an idiot with potential. And I'm like, that's such a mean thing to say, how dare you? But what she would say, if she was here, what she would say is, I saw enough in him that I'm like, that's a dude that I could love the rest of my life. But that's also a dude who has let me down. And in those moments when I let her down or when she let me down, what helps us recover is gracious assumptions. When we look at each other as young adults, look at each other and say, you know what? I know you're flaky, late, insecure, disrespectful, whiny. And you're like, oh man, this list kind of hurts. Like, yes, sometimes I'm all of those things. But it is also true that you are ambitious, kind, service-minded, coachable, so full of potential. And when we make gracious assumptions about other people, we view them not as immoral, not as broken, not as wicked, not as unfixable, but as people who are immature, people who are growing, and maybe someone I can grow with together. If we approach our relationships like that, that has a profound impact on friendships in general, and that leads very well into a dating relationship, into a marriage relationship. If we work diligently, we will grow in our communication skills, and those communication skills make healthier relationships, which help us as we get into dating. But as we get into dating, it is always possible that things don't work out. And it might not be just communication breakdown. It might be we actually just aren't a good fit. So I'm gonna take these last few minutes and I wanna talk about that. What happens when, let's say, you've worked on communication. Now you're in a dating relationship and things are going well, or maybe not well. And maybe kind of well, but not well, and then kind of well again. And you're wondering, is this like normal hard? Or is it maybe not gonna work? How should I approach that? How should I handle that kind of communication? So our second point is we need to walk away quietly. So I'm gonna use the same proverb, Proverb 12:11. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. Again, Proverbs just gives us a principle that we then use in life. So the principle before was that hard work brings a harvest. The principle now is that when we recognize folly, we should turn back, right? He who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. If you don't turn back from a worthless pursuit, you lack sense. Then therefore the opposite is also true. When you turn back from a worthless pursuit, that is a wise thing. We should wisely turn back from folly. So I want to talk about the way we discern if a relationship is a good fit or a bad fit. For the most part, I'm going to tell people, and I've told many of you, I don't think there's such a thing as a bad choice. I think there's a few, I'll give you a caveat. I think there is a few bad choices. There's a few bad choices in the sense of there are things that I think are non-starters. So one example would be if someone is a non-Christian, I consider that a non-starter. If the point of dating is to get you to marriage, then it does not make sense that you would date someone that you would never marry. Right? When we spoke about marriage, we talked about faith being the center, right? The Ecclesiastes used that language of a rope of 3 strands, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. So God is the center of the relationship around which you grow, and then God is the foundation of the relationship. So it does not make sense to even get into a relationship with someone who's not a Christian. You want fundamentally different things in life. So that would be an example of a bad choice. And then I would add a second category in terms of a bad choice. Someone who is unwell. And I want to define this very carefully. When I say unwell, what I have in mind are chronic conditions, because chronic conditions bring a lifetime of challenges. This doesn't mean it's an automatic hard no, but it means that we should approach it kind of with a caution, right? Like a yellow flag, if you will. When I'm talking about chronic conditions, I mean things like addiction, like alcohol, narcotics, prescription drugs, things like physical health challenges, so chronic pain, insomnia, mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, personality disorders. All of these things are reasons to, when you look at a relationship, even before you get into it, or as you're in the relationship, to say, okay, where are we at in the relationship? If the person that you're with or the person that you're interested in is getting treatment, has support structures in their life, full speed ahead. If the person you're interested in, if the person you're with is not interested in getting treatment, is not interested in helping, in managing the health challenges they're facing, that is a good reason to not jump in, or is a good reason to walk away. Dating is not the same as marriage. When you are married, it's a covenant. You're in there for life. When you're dating, if you're with someone that does not want to be healthy, that's a yellow flag. That's a potential reason to walk away. So there are 2 examples of what would be a bad choice. But for the most part, when I look at relationships, the counsel that I give people is there's only better or worse fits. So when you look at a relationship, it might be better, it might be worse. Assuming it's not a bad choice, there are things that make it better and there are things that make it worse. So to give you an example, things that make it easier, or things that make it harder. Things that make it easier, so I'll use myself as an example. I, if you have not noticed, am a pretty outgoing guy, pretty assertive dude. It would not have been very good for me if I married a girl who was kind of a wallflower, kind of quiet, kind of meek and mild. That girl probably would not have had all her opinions heard, right? And no one really wants that. I don't think there's any girl out there that's you know what I'd love? I'd love to be bossed around my entire life, right? Ladies, anyone there? No, didn't think so. So it would have been helpful for me if I met a girl who was maybe a little bit of a redhead, a little spicy even, right? Willing to clap back. I'm also super task focused. So I'm here's my checklist. I've checked every box. Life is good. How dare you interrupt my checklist? And I married a girl who's you know what matters more than anything? People. And then when we merged our lives together, what I found was oh my goodness, I have so much room to grow. Rebecca was a better fit for me, the best fit that I could possibly imagine, because she has shaped me and challenged me and grown me in a lot of places that I did not realize I was immature. So I would describe our relationship as a better fit. And the best fit, we got married. Now we're covenanted together. But it is possible to pick a harder fit. So if I had picked someone who was wildly, or as contentious as me, but not as forgiving as Rebecca, that would have been a much harder fit. If I had picked someone who was also task focused, but wanted different things in life, that would have been a harder fit. right? We can pick harder or we can pick easier. So the big question is, how do I know if the relationship I'm in is harder or easier? Like, it's hard to tell. Like, because I know, you just told me, Fredy, relationships take work. Communication skills take work. Like, of course it's gonna be hard. But is this like good hard or is this bad hard? Should it be easier, right? I think there are significant questions that come up. So I wanna give you kind of two things to consider as we discern, is this an easier fit? Is this person compatible? First, generally speaking, opposites are going to attract. When you look at the person you're interested in, when you look at the person you're currently dating, there will often and should often be some level of difference in your guys' relationship. There should obviously be things that are the same, but when you are pursuing a dating relationship, there is often things that are a little bit different that end up making the relationship more stable, more long-lasting. So let me give you some examples. If you're an adventure person, you're spontaneous, you're always down for a good time, it is super helpful to have someone in your life that's maybe a little bit more of a planner. Adventures are great until you end up, without gas and a flat tire on the side of the road driving back from Banff. Then it's like, wait a minute, the adventure wasn't that fun, right? So my wife is an adventure person, but she's had some crazy stories. And she married a guy who's a planner. And what's actually happened is that our life is way more fun together because I'm lame and I would never do anything fun if I didn't have Rebecca, but we might not survive the next trip if it was just Rebecca. So we have that balance. Opposites attract. People-oriented people need task-focused people. If you only care about people, it is possible that you only bounce around and you never get anything done. So you actually need someone in your life that's like, hey, like maybe we could follow through on something. Like maybe we can connect with just this person, just this once. If you are emotionally expressive, right? You have a little bit more pizzazz in your life. It's helpful to have someone who's a little bit more stable, a little bit more stoic. So opposites attract. It's not a universal truth. It doesn't have to happen, but it is often something that makes a relationship easier. Is this person strong somewhere that I'm not? Opposites attract. That is an easier fit. Secondly, people only appreciate what they know about you. So when something is an easier fit, you only really know if it's an easier fit if you actually know the person that you're talking to. So the things that help us know, is this an easier fit? Is this a good fit? Is if we talk about the things that really matter to us. So I talk about this every single year because I'm deeply committed to it. I think every person needs to have their non-negotiables sorted. You need to know in your mind what are the top 3 to 5 things that make me who I am, that I'm looking to find someone that fits with these things. They don't have to have the same non-negotiables, but they can't be in conflict with each other, right? If I'm a Christian, if I'm a committed Christian, I need someone who's also a committed Christian. Maybe they don't say committed Christian, maybe they say active Christian, maybe they say born again Christian, but faith has to be a part of the relationship. If I approach relationships and I want a very small circle of deep relationships, then I'm totally fine that I meet someone that has maybe broader ambitions. They want a bigger friend group, but I can't have someone that's not interested in friendships at all. I need to have someone that is in some way compatible. When I look at my own life, that third level of non-negotiable, so not faith, not relationships, but stuff unique to you, so much of that is family of origin. When I look at myself, I would say the third Fredy non-negotiable is work ethic. The more I've talked about that, the more I've shared about that in counseling settings, either myself attending counseling or me counseling other people, has been kind of looking back into the past and saying this is from my family of origin. I grew up in an immigrant household. My dad worked in the fields in California, minimum wage, not even minimum wage. Back in the day, you got paid by the pound. And he started working at 14. My dad, by the time he had a family, when he was 27, he never worked less than 2 jobs. So I'm in my mind, as a little boy, I had no concept of someone working less than 40 hours. 40 hours is a minimum if you're a man. If you are a man and you don't work, your family starves. That's what I saw growing up. So I grew up with a fanatical work ethic because my dad was like that. I would have never fit with someone who's like, you know what? I was hoping to just chill. I was thinking we could binge watch 16 seasons of whatever's hot right now. I don't even know what's hot on TV because I don't watch it. I needed someone who was a good fit. Every single one of us has a family of origin that shaped us in significant ways. If you don't know how your family of origin has shaped you, then it's gonna be really hard for you to know who would be a good fit because you don't even know who you are. We need to know how we approach faith, how we approach relationships, and how our family of origin has shaped us. Those are non-negotiables. If you know those things, you share about those things. As you share about those things in a dating relationship, you'll be able to discern, is this person a good fit? Often, as we share about these things, I think we feel a lot of pressure. My experience is as I talk to young adults, like that's the word that comes up, and sometimes they don't use the word, but they'll describe it, where they're like, okay, like, yes, like I get it, I need to talk about these things, but like, it's the first date, man. Like, I don't wanna be weird. I don't wanna like spook her, I don't wanna spook him. And they're like, I don't wanna look like desperate and like bring up everything on the first date or the second date or the 10th date. I don't wanna be like pushy. Actually, I've been burned before, so I'm gonna ask everything on the first date because I'm not wasting my time on anyone, right? People bring in a lot of baggage. It adds a lot of pressure. It makes it really hard to get to know people because it affects us. It affects our ability to simply communicate, to simply share our story. So our gracious assumptions don't just happen in regular communication with our friends, with our family, with our coworkers. It happens in dating relationships when as we jump into these conversations about your non-negotiables, about the way your family of origin has shaped you, about the things you want in life, you make gracious assumptions about the other person. Maybe they're just super curious. It's not that weird that they would want to talk about my family, that they would want to talk about faith, that they would want to talk about household expectations. Those are normal things to talk about in a dating relationship. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to make a gracious assumption. As we date, what we're trying to do is discern, is this an easier fit or a harder fit? If it's an easier fit, full speed ahead. If it's a harder fit, then you need to decide, is it gonna get easier? Is this just us needing to work through communication struggles? Or maybe it's harder because we're just not a good fit at all. If it's easier, keep going. If it's harder, I think the way that people go into folly is they start to make bad assumptions. Not bad assumptions about the other person, but bad assumptions about the situation. They'll say like, let's keep dating, I hope it gets better. But you don't really change anything. You'll just hope it gets better. But hope doesn't actually change anything. Or you keep dating and pretend things are getting better, but they're actually exactly the same. You're just more committed because you spent more time together, you have more shared experience, and you think, I guess eventually we have to figure it out. That doesn't make a relationship stronger. Some challenges can certainly be overcome, and you just keep dating. That's why you date. Some challenges cannot be overcome. And you need to have the courage to walk away from a relationship that is a harder fit that you don't think is gonna get easier. That's obviously a big decision. It's not a decision that you should make in a moment. It's not a decision you should make alone. That's why we have friends. That's why we have parents. That's why we have pastors. There are other people that you can present the situation to and say, here's what I'm feeling. This is why I think it's harder. And what the other person is gonna do is they're gonna give you feedback and they'll say, I think it's harder because you're making ungracious assumptions. I think it's harder because it's 2 months in. It's just gonna be harder. Or they'll say, actually, I think it's easier and I think it's your perspective. Or they might say, you know what, it is harder and it sounds like you guys just aren't a good fit. What are you gonna do about it? And what this proverb reminds us is that if it's not an easier fit, if it's actually a harder fit, and we would go as far as to say that maybe it's just not a good fit, it's a bad fit, then you need the courage to walk away. And I wanna give you 3 steps to walk away quietly. So I'm gonna give you kind of like a blueprint for breakups. I recognize that this is an awkward thing to say, so if you hate it, you can ignore it. But what I'm trying to do is help you prepare for how you can move out of a relationship in a way that still honors the other person, right? Christian people, if you are a Christian, are saying, I think this other person is made in the image of God. I think this other person is still a brother or sister, even if we don't work out. So if I walk away, I want to walk away quietly. I want to not make drama. I want to not make a scene. I want to leave the situation in such a way that eventually we can walk past each other in church and say hi. You don't have to be best friends, but you can be not weird. And I recognize in a room full of young adults, that's a big ask. So here's the 3 steps. I tested these on Adriana. She said they were good. If you hate them, it's on her. No, I'm just kidding. They're mine. All right, step 1. Tell them why in 1 sentence or less. So tell them why it's a harder fit in 1 sentence or less. This is the one that people fumble the bag on all the time. I've talked through several breakup stories in the last year, and I've heard some doozies. So you get together and it's like an 8-hour debrief, and you're like, here's all the memory lane, and here's what could have happened, and oh my goodness, and then actually maybe we don't break up, and you waffle, right? That's not necessary. If you have discerned in conversation with trusted friends, with your parents, with a pastor, with people that you trust, if you said, actually, this is not a good fit, then I'm like, you don't need a long conversation. What you need is a 1 sentence, here's why it doesn't work. And you simply say that. And sometimes it's helpful to write it down. You don't need a 10-page love letter. You need a single sentence that you can put on a note card that you can type out if your penmanship is terrible, and you say, this is why. This is not a good fit for me because we understand faith differently. This is not a good fit for me because I think we want different things in life. This is not a good fit for me because I don't like the way you breathe. Like, the last one was a joke to make sure you're paying attention. Whatever your reason is, if you have discerned in the company of other people, that wise people that you trust, that this is a bad fit, have the courage to just tell the person, this is why. It doesn't need to be crazy long, but it does need to be clear. Secondly, make a clean break by giving and taking space to breathe. One of the things that we do is when a young adult breaks up, they'll say like, but I still want to be friends. And what we're trying to do in that moment is like, not be weird. But what ends up happening is you're like, hey, are you going to that thing later? Or you see each other at the group event or at the group hang, or they are still at family dinner, or your families are super close, so you keep running into each other. And what it does is it makes it really hard for you to emotionally unattach from a person that you have now relationally unattached from. So you actually need space, like for some amount of time. So there is no like right amount of time. What I usually tell people is it's smart to take 3 to 6 months. For the most part, 3 to 6 months is a good number on like, I don't want to spend significant quality time with this person. I don't want to text or call or snap or be real or FaceTime this person. What I'm trying to do is I want a little bit of space so the emotions can catch up to reality. We are now separate, so our emotions need to be separate. You need space and time to breathe. Lastly, you cannot be awkward. So I'm gonna say, don't be awkward. So tell them why in 1 sentence or less. Make a clean break by giving and taking space to breathe. Third, don't be awkward. Here's what I mean when I say don't be awkward. When you break up with someone, as almost all of us will, and if you've not broken up with someone you may be broken up with, this is how we should treat the other person. Don't be awkward. And what I mean by that is the way we interact with them in public social settings is often quite damaging. The thing that we ought to do is treat that other person, because they're still made in the image of God, they're still a person, they're still a Christian maybe. So like we wanna give them some level of honor, decency, and respect. So the advice I give people is treat them like the old lady that lives on your street. When you see that old lady that lives on your street, what do? You're not gonna hang out, right? But you hit her with a wave, like, hey, good to see you, Mabel. And you get back in your car and you drive. When you see Mabel at church, good to see you, Mabel. Make sure you take out trash cans, right? Like you say hi, you acknowledge their presence, you have some general kindness, but you're not hanging out. That's what I mean when I say don't be awkward. When things end, as they might, if you are discerning, if you have the wisdom to turn back from folly, these are 3 steps to move out of the relationship in a way that honors the other person, gives you the time to emotionally unattach, and helps you move on in health. It's obviously a little awkward to talk about breakups, but breakups are a particular moment where you're still using the same communication skills we talked about at the beginning of the sermon. Sometimes you need the courage to walk away. And if you walk away, you should walk away quietly in a way that still honors and respects the other person. So, at the beginning, I shared about my wife making that comment, why does communication have to be so hard? I think she was right. I think I was too immature in the moment to recognize the depth of her statement. But the more I've thought about that was a comment she made to me 8 years ago. The more I have thought about that comment, the more I have been like, man, that is so true. That is so true about relationships. And the good news is you actually can grow. Communication is a skill that you grow in. And as we grow in that skill, it makes us better at friendship, it makes us better at dating, and ultimately it prepares you for marriage. The goal of dating is to get to marriage, and in dating, you practice the skills that prepare you for marriage. The most important skill in a dating relationship is communication so that you can keep that marriage covenant together. That communication doesn't start in dating. It starts in every relationship you already have. So my hope is whether you're dating, whether you're single, whether you're trying to be dating, whether you're taking time to emotionally unattach, whatever relation status you find yourself in, the principles of communication can still be of value to you. Pick the right word at the right time, in the right tone, right? And as you do that, with gracious assumptions, you will grow in your communication skills, and every relationship you're in will improve. Everything good takes effort to gain. Our communication is no different. Let me pray for us, and then I'd like the worship team back up. Thank you. Father God, thank you for this word from Proverbs 12:11, God, a simple proverb, but one with so much depth that reminds us that hard work pays off. Something that we see on motivational posters and on Instagram, but God is true. When we put in work, you do reward it. And the most important work we can put into our relationships is growing in the skill of communication. So Father, I pray that as we grow as communicators, as we develop our friendships and our work relationships, God, that these skills would translate into every kind of relationship. If people are here and they're dating, that they would grow in their dating relationship, that they would grow in their communication skills. If they're engaged, if they're married, God, I pray for every person that they would continue to mature, that they would make gracious assumptions, and that they would learn to be better at communicating. God, help us. We need your help as we continue to grow. I pray for these young adults, God, that they would mature more and more into the image of Jesus. We ask all these things in your mighty name. Amen.